the enforcement of intellectual property rights, and taking steps to ensure effective competition to avoid the excess of market-dominant positions. It also means unlocking the full potential of e-commerce and other tradable services. And in all these areas, following the steps that have been identified by Roberto, we can actually use flexible approaches. We don't have to go for it all, but flexible approaches might certainly be the way to stitch what we have. Third, we need to work in partnership to ensure that trade is more effective in delivering for people. And this is not something that will be determined at the international level. It is something where, it is an area where international framework, policies, determination have to join hands with domestic local policies. Because we know that trade has helped transform the world by boosting productivity, spreading new technologies, and making product more affordable. Here in Asia, for example, trade has been instrumental in creating the world's largest middle class. And around the world, economic integration has boosted per capita incomes while creating millions of new jobs with higher wages. And yet, we all know that some workers, some communities are heavily affected by the human cost of disruption, whether from technology, from trade, or from a combination of both. And that is why we need more effective policies, including scaled-up investment in training and social safety nets so that workers can upgrade their skills, transition to higher quality jobs, and earn more. And that's where the domestic policies have to join hands with the international framework. We can all do more, but we cannot do it alone. The IMF is supporting its members through analysis advice. This includes our most recent World Economic Outlook, launched yesterday, and a new study on trade that is jointly produced by the IMF, the WTO, and the World Bank. It also includes our annual assessments of individual economies where we often advise on country-specific aspects of trade regime. And of course, we will always provide a joint platform which is open to all, not to a few, open to all, in order to explore what changes can actually be invented and implemented. And this conference, which brings all the institutions together, is a clear evidence of the fact that on that particular aspect, we are joining hands and we are together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madame Lagarde. President Kim, I would like to invite you to the podium now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin, and thank everybody for being here. For us, the key to ending poverty is to drive inclusive, sustainable economic growth. And in an increasingly interconnected world, trade is, frankly, the engine of that growth. Over the last 3 decades, trade has been a driving force behind the reduction of poverty and global inequality. Trade in goods as a share of GDP increased from 30% in 1988 to 52% in 2017. Rapid globalization has gone hand in hand with an increase in average income of around 24% in the world. Average incomes have increased almost half for the bottom 40% of the world's population, and much of that, of course, has been driven by China and India. During about the same time, since about the 1990s, more than 1 billion people have lifted themselves out of poverty, and the rate of extreme poverty has dropped to around 10%, the lowest it has ever been in recorded history. The pro-poor impact of trade liberalization in developing countries is clear. For example, in the 2001 US-Vietnam Free Trade Agreement helped reduce poverty in Vietnam by increasing wages in export-oriented sectors, catalyzing job reallocation from agriculture, forestry, and fishing into manufacturing, and by stimulating enterprise job growth. Similarly, in Argentina, Mercosur benefited poor and middle-class households relatively more than rich households. But in recent years, as we all know, trade liberalization has stalled. And in just the last few months, we've seen a return to protectionism. The escalation of tariffs will negatively affect the entire global growth outlook and slow down the pace of poverty reduction at a time when we can least afford it. Our biannual Poverty and Shared Prosperity report found that the pace of poverty reduction is slowing. To reach our goal of bringing extreme poverty below 3% by 2030, the world's poorest countries must grow at a rate that far surpasses their historical experience. Trade is a key factor if we were to have any hope of seeing that kind of growth. A reversal of trade openness would hurt many poor households in both developing and developed countries. Protectionist trade policies can cause a chain reaction as more countries adopt similar measures. The global recovery is built on investment, and there's a real danger that businesses will decide to wait for more policy clarity before engaging in new projects. Recent World Bank Group analysis shows that in a scenario where investor confidence is shaken and investments drop, every country will feel the negative effects. We need to continue to support trade reforms that can deliver greater prosperity for all. That includes removing trade barriers in areas such as services, agriculture, and e-commerce, and reducing subsidies and other measures that distort trade. The overall aim is to strengthen the multilateral trading system. Within countries, policy packages should ensure that trade gains are widely shared. Trade contributes to creating jobs overall, but many people in entire regions can be left behind. With trade, we don't have to choose between inclusiveness and economic growth. When we're working to boost and invigorate trade, those workers and those communities that aren't benefiting from globalization need to be at the front of our minds. There are ways to mitigate the negative impacts that trade may have, such as job search assistance, retraining, and vocational training. The Human Capital Index, which we're launching this week, will help countries invest more and more effectively in their people to build the foundations for lifelong learning, from early childhood education to workplace training to online courses for seniors. These investments will help ensure that workers will be prepared to compete in the more complex, increasingly digital economy of the future. Robust and inclusive trade is critical to our mission of ending poverty by 2030 and boosting shared prosperity among the poorest 40% around the world. The next World Development Report will focus on global value chains and their potential for helping developing countries integrate into global markets and to create jobs. And the report will be done under the leadership of our incoming chief economist, Penny Goldberg. Penny, you're here. Thank you. Penny is one of the great trade economists in the world, but I just want to say, Penny, you know, it turns out that if you write a very disruptive report at the World Bank and disrupt the institution, that's your path to a Nobel Prize. It's happened twice. It's happened twice already, and so we have great expectations for you. Now's the time to press for trade reforms that can deliver greater prosperity for everyone, not just a few. I hope the discussion today brings new ideas and avenues to pursue those reforms that will help us to end poverty once and for all. Thank you.
Thank you, President Kim. Now I would like to invite Director General Azevêdo to the podium, please.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here and to be joining forces with Christine, Jim, and Angel for this important conference at this crucial moment for global trade. And today's event is intended precisely to reinforce some economic fundamentals, specifically the importance of trade for growth. And it seems to me that we have a clear disconnect right here. New polling, which was presented at the WTO last week, shows that most people believe that trade is positive. In advanced economies, on average, 88% of people said that trade was good, or that trade is good. In emerging economies, it is 83%. But despite this very broad and instinctive support for trade in principle, it seems that people still doubt the specific benefits of trade for them. Now, this raises a range of issues for domestic policy, but it also raises questions about how we see trade and its role for the economy. So, for example, very few people, and that's what the polls show, believe that trade lowers prices. That is striking because any economist would say that this is among the clearest benefits that trade delivers. Now, this is important because if we start to doubt these fundamentals of why trade matters, then gradually we will stop valuing and we'll stop safeguarding the mechanisms that make trade possible the way that we have it today. Now, of course, one such mechanism is the multilateral trading system. Now, let me be clear, the trading system is not perfect. We never said it was, but it does represent the best efforts of governments around the world working together for 70 years to find ways to cooperate on trade issues. It took a lot of people and a lot of time to push the boulder this far up the hill, and even keeping it in place requires constant effort. Today, the WTO covers about 98% of global trade. It has overseen a historic opening of markets and integrating economies. Since 1980, the average tariffs have been cut by 2/3. The system has provided stability and predictability in global trade, holding firm even during the financial crisis. And as a result, it has helped to fuel unprecedented growth and development around the world, and as well as a dramatic reduction in poverty. The system has real value, so of course we have to keep working at it. We should acknowledge that progress in delivering new trade reform has been slow in recent years. In fact, between the creation of the WTO in 1995 all the way to 2013, when we met here at the conference in Bali, there were virtually no reforms at all. Since that meeting, we have begun to change that story, and we delivered a number of major deals. The Trade Facilitation Agreement, like I said, which was struck here in Bali, the Expanded Information Technology Agreement, the deal to abolish export subsidies in agriculture, and a number of other steps on food security and in support for the least developed countries, for example. Now, this is very positive, but clearly it is not enough. Progress in many key areas have been stalled for some years, and in the meantime, the world has not stopped, as you may have noticed. The economic priorities have changed, new ones have emerged. Technology is transforming how we produce and how we trade. Geopolitics is evolving. And all of this has given rise to a new debate about how to make the WTO more effective. And this debate has taken off in recent months. Many leaders have committed to working together on this reform agenda. And in this context, I think it is vital that everyone who believes in the system raises their voice. We all have a role to play in this one, and that includes the private sector, of course. I very much welcome the new global dialogue on trade, which the ICC is launching here in Bali later today. We have to explore all avenues which could ease the current tensions and strengthen the trading system. We all know the risks of further escalation, risks to the economy, risks to the trading system itself, which, by the way, would multiply the economic risks over the long term. We cannot let that happen. We need trade and the trading system to play their full part in fueling growth, just as they have done so effectively over the past 7 decades. So I really look forward to our debate today, and please be creative in this debate. And once again, thanks for your support in this effort. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Director General Azevêdo. Secretary General Gurría, please.
A few days ago, we put out our growth projections for the world, and instead of 3.8% growth for 2018, we said 3.7, a little weaker, and then instead of 3.9 for 2019, we said 3.7 again. I understand that the IMF's rollout of some of the projections yesterday was more or less along the same line. And what has changed? Well, trade in the first half of 2018 is growing at 3%. And last year, it was growing at 5%. So it looked good. And this year, it doesn't look so good. And what is different? Well, the trade. The tensions. the protectionism, this, the tit for tat, the retaliations, the one-sided. This is what happened. This is what changed. In the middle of the recovery, suddenly we started doing these things, and then what happened is, of course, we slowed down the whole process, and now we have an actual slowing down of the economic recovery, and it is explained by the locomotive is no longer pulling as hard as it used to, which is trade. So there you see, the tensions are largely the result of frustrations that built up the system over decades. Yes, many are concerned that not everyone is competing on the level playing field. That is true. They fear that high levels of state support remain in key sectors. Yes, we must deal with it, from agriculture to industrials, and that international rulemaking is not keeping pace with business realities. Yes, but do we dump it all and then suddenly just start, putting tariffs on each other? No. The thing is to address these issues. Now, it's also a question of speed. Does the international trading system resolve the disputes very fast? No, we could accuse it of everything except of being fast. Okay? And the problem, should we get faster? Yes. The problem is multilateral solutions are slower. Yes, but the ownership is much greater. And it sticks. It sticks. In the end, it works better because everybody accepts them, and everybody then works according to the accepted solution, and therefore it sticks and it works better for a longer, rather than having only unilateral agreements on the question. So there's also in our work, Ken Ash is here, our Director of Trade. He and his team produced a Making Trade Work for All, working very closely with Roberto and the WTO. And what does it say? It basically says it's asymmetric. What does this mean? A little bit of damage goes a long way in terms of hurting trade. And a little bit of opening goes a long way in terms of generating more trade and more GDP growth. And you know what? It's about double when you open in terms of the good that it generates than the damage that it does. But what we're having now is we're regressing rather than continuing the openness that we were doing for so many years. So again, that has a cost. We also, I would take one thing that Roberto said, I take it up. He said, if we stop believing, what we have to do is not a question of belief. What we got to do is continuing to put the evidence in front of everybody so that people, eventually they will not be able to deny the evidence. The evidence just has to be there. We have to be evidence-based. This is a way in which we are going to defend the whole thing. Just put out the evidence, put out the evidence, Also, put out the evidence about the fact that when trade suffers, you have a problem of social mobility. You have a problem of, a broken social elevator, as we have determined also in our own analysis. And then, last but not least, we are not believing it, the institutions we create. In the Hangzhou Summit, in the G20, we created a global forum on excess steel capacity, okay? What started the whole thing? What started the pressures? What started the tariff wars, etc.? Wasn't it steel and aluminum? Well, we created a forum to deal with that, precisely. And then we didn't follow through because we started putting tariffs in the middle of the process while we were still working with the Global Forum on Steel Excess Capacity in order to deal with the substance of the problem. Now, eventually, if we don't deal with the substance of the problem, we will not be able to finish the problem. And we will, we have projected in the next 10 years, demand will only grow by about 1% in steel, and therefore we would not be able to deal with the excess capacity. Therefore, we have to dismantle excess capacity. How do we do that? By negotiation and by discussing and by talking and by providing information. One company by company, and then each plant by plant and product by product, etc. And twice, it's almost died. We had to rescue it, give it, mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Why? Because while we were discussing, the tariffs were put on. And then, of course, they said, why are we discussing the solution of the final problem, which is to dismantle capacity, if in the middle the tariffs are being put on? Well, we've convinced the players, we are the facilitator of this process, that it was worth to continue doing the process, because eventually, if we showed to our political masters that we were making progress on the substance, eventually maybe they could perhaps move off the question of the tariffs. So again, let's believe in the institutions that we have created, and let's believe in the evidence. Thank you.